Hello everyone. So my name is Omkar. Today we are at Institution, and we are here to do an interview with the author Mallika Ravikumar. She has come out with her latest book, 565, the dramatic story of unifying India. And let me introduce the author to you first. Mallika Ravikumar is a lawyer turned author who writes for young readers, and her focus is on Indian history, culture, and nature. Hello, Malika. Nice to have you here.
Thank you so much, Omkar, for that wonderful introduction, and thanks to InstaSend for having me here at their center. This is a book which is not very often discussed in history classrooms and textbooks. I'm very happy to have people learn about the story through this book.
So, my very first question to you was about the design. I love the design of the book. Had you played any role in with the design?
Yeah, so I get this a lot from a lot of people who say they love the cover. I love the cover too. So the cover designer is a very talented artist called Priyanka Patspande, and she has designed the cover of many books, including this one. And so I played a very minimal role. I was asked for some inputs, and I said yes, maybe some coat of arms and some royal symbols, and of course the title of the book. And then I got a few options from her through the publisher, and they were in different colors. So just selecting what color I like best and layout I like best, but it was all Priyanka's great work.
I'm sure you selected the best color, in royal blue.
Yeah.
That suits the theme of the book.
Absolutely.
So, tell me, Malika, what inspired you to write this book? Like the history of post around the time of independence, partition, and I think this is an area that is not uh, covered a lot in mainstream history.
Yeah.
So, what was there any particular reason, any event, any untold story that you came across?
Yeah, so when I started writing a few years ago, so I used to be a lawyer, as you said, and when I started, I got interested in writing. I was earlier working as a content writer for some projects. I wanted to write a book, but I didn't know if I didn't have the confidence of pitching a book to a publisher. So I was working on certain projects, and one of the projects I worked on was the Government of India website on Sardar Patel. The National Virtual Libraries of India is like a virtual museum on big various leaders. And the government project was looking for writers, and I applied for that, and I got a chance to be the content writer and curator for the National Virtual Libraries of India website about Sardar Patel. So during that, I researched a lot about his life. I traveled to Gujarat, to Karamsal, his birthplace, and Ahmedabad, where he worked, and so on. And I collected a lot of information about him, and I thought there's so much that I learned through that project while working on that site, and I thought, there has to be something more than just a website, and especially for younger readers to know the story, because it was such an amazing story. So that's really what started off the journey.
Wonderful. First, ask you a few questions, general questions, and then we can. Because I've gone through the entire book and I have many bookmarks, so
Okay.
I have to ask you a few very specific things, but we'll go to that a bit later.
Yeah.
So, can you talk about your research process? Like, because there are so many princely states that you have included in it, so I'm sure it would have taken a very long time to go through it. So, could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so the research, of course, so this is a non-fiction, work of non-fiction, but told in the format of fiction. So this is creative non-fiction. So the research actually was like in any non-fiction book, because you can't make up stuff like in fiction, a fictional story. It's not historical fiction, it is completely non-fiction. So the process took about 5 years actually, from the time I thought of the book to actually the book coming out, including COVID-related delays, but still it was a 5-year process. And I spent a lot of time reading books, in libraries, the Nehru Center in Worli is where I did a lot of my research at the library there. And research papers, books written by others, original sources like correspondence of Sardar Patel, correspondence of Nehru, the transfer of power papers, which are all now available in public, Jinnah's papers again available in public. So some original sources, a lot of secondary sources, but a huge long process of research of materials to come up with this. And because it's, like I said, it's creative non-fiction, so it's not just typically how academic non-fiction is written, where you find the data, you present it in a nice way with footnotes and things, but this is narrated as a story, so you have to add the emotional angle, and like a movie being a scene of a movie. So that also took time to bring in which part should come into which chapter, because it is broken down state-wise. So the research also involved, planning the book in a way that is more visually appealing.
So, do you find all the data in India itself, or have you
No. So all this is available in India, but a lot of materials are available on sites like archive.org, which are not which are on the
Which are
internet.
available.
But you have books, you have papers, you have a lot of material which is available there. But like the library research I did was all here. Sites I visited in Gujarat all is all related to, because it's an Indian book that way, so all the materials were here.
Now you have included, I mean, I guess, I don't recall the number of the states, I think 13?
13 states, yeah.
Like why these 13 states and not any other?
So the states that were selected were keeping in mind the dramatic value of the events that took place there, and the fact that it is a book that would appeal to readers of different ages. So the material should be suitable for younger readers as well. So all those factors were kept in mind, but mainly something that would give a flavor of this whole accession saga, while doing justice to the grandiosity of 500 plus states, which cannot all be covered, but still gives a sense of what would have happened across India. So those are the factors that went into selecting the states.
So, yeah. So, now Sardar Patel, obviously, we know that he played a very important role. I think VP Menon is slightly, like people don't, I mean, people know he has played an important role, but I think he has been slightly forgotten or
Right.
something. But I think you point out in many places
Yeah.
throughout this book about his role in the entire process. But what about those other people? I think you've also included a lot of other people in the book. So could you just elaborate any other people who played almost as an important role as these two in the
Yeah.
process of unification?
Yeah, there were actually several other people. Even VP Menon, when I take the book to schools and I show the photograph and I said, you recognize, most children or even adults don't recognize VP Menon, which is very sad because he's in some sense a very important, like a co-architect of what the India we have today. But apart from VP Menon, there were many others who served as the divans of the princely states. And they played a very, very crucial role because like in the chapters of Jodhpur, Bikaner, Gwalior, etc., where the Maharajas, the rulers had some doubt, they were vacillating, whether we should be independent, whether we should join Pakistan, whether we should join India. The divans actually gave them, they all looked to their divans, who were then called prime ministers of the princely states, for advice on what they should do. And these people were, either from the civil services or they had trained elsewhere, they had served as divans in other states, they were very experienced. And they gave them very sagacious, good advice, on what they should do at that time, in a very crucial time, which was a pressure situation. So many of these divans played a very, very important role, and all of them have been mentioned in the book. Some of them that we have illustrations, because I wanted their faces to be seen. So many of these, other than VP Menon, there were several others as well.
Very interesting fact I found was that a lot of them were from South India. Like
Yeah.
I think in Rajasthan, all the big states had South Indian. Was it like coincidental or was it any, by design, anything that you found in your research, that was it an attempt to put these people there or just a coincidence?
I think it was not by design, but because many of them came from, so Madras was a presidency at that time, and it had schools and colleges because the British had set it up. Knowledge of English was very important, and a lot of people from Madras state had English education, because there were British schools and colleges there. And these divans, one of their roles was also to liaise between the ruler and the British, the viceroy or the resident. So they had to know English, they had to know the ways of the British. And because these people were all educated in Madras state with English background, they could write letters, they could easily talk to the British. They were preferred in those jobs. So it was not a coincidence in that sense, but yes, but being educated in English because they were in Madras was a common factor.
So my next question was going to be about the people's role. Like a lot of these people who have lived under the princely states for all these centuries, decades, whatever. Like what was their aim? Like did they want to be independent? Did they want to be democratic? And in some places there were, I think, organizations, Prajamantals.
Right.
Bit elaborate on the role of the people as well as the role of the Congress, the state people's Congress.
Right. So the role of the people in many states wanted to organize themselves together and wanted more democratic reforms. And some states actually had introduced reforms, like Mysore was one of the liberal states which had introduced some sort of democratic reforms, but several states did not. and the people's movements were there, and the All India States People's Conference was an organization that was put together by the people of the states who got together to say that we want to demand more freedom from our Maharajas or Nawabs or whoever. So that institution was created, but the Congress actually for a very long time decided not to intervene in the princely states because they were already fighting with the British. Later on, there was also a big battle with the Muslim League, and they did not have the bandwidth to have one more battle in the princely states. Already British India, they were spread out. So they took a policy decision of not intervening in the princely states for a long time. And later on, their policy began to change in the early 1940s when they decided that the princely states were also as much, the people in the princely states were as Indian as the British Indian, people in British India. And they also had a right to freedom, they also had a right to all that they were demanding. And the Congress took more and more interest in the princely states in the 1940s. Till then, they were not intervening much. The States People Conference actually, the Congress, their paths narrowed so much that in 1947, the head of the States People's Conference was Jawaharlal Nehru. So there were almost this, many common people between both. There were a lot of movements in Congress indirectly supported and actually even promoted protests by State People's Conference, and whenever they found that the ruler may not accede to India, there were talks of going through the States People's Conference to create protests and create some movement in the state to show to express to the Maharaja that the aspirations of the people were that they wanted him to join India. So that was definitely a factor in the whole process.
So can you elaborate on any of those, like what you have recorded in your book, any of these movements? Like particularly I found this one where in Travancore, the Divan is attacked.
Yes.
So was that planned by the State People's Conference, or was it like some individuals taking their law in their hand?
Right. So in Travancore, the States People's Conference, money was actually pumped in through the Congress, through Said Dalmia, who was, a lot of industrialists supported the Congress to create movement amongst the people and protests against the Maharaja, because there was Travancore had already declared independence and they would not be a part of India. It was the first state to declare independence. So to create some trouble there was money pumped in for protests and movements and marches and all that. And then ultimately, one of the things that completely changed what ultimately happened was because there was an assassination attempt on the Diwan C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, who was seen as the main hurdle preventing Travancore's joining India. But that assassination attempt did not have anything to do with the Congress. It came from somebody from the Socialist Party. So that communist movement also was very strong in that area, and a lot of people communists did not like the Diwan, because C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer had used violent means to crush the communist movement in that area. So he was a very unpopular man even amongst the communists. And the attack actually came from somebody called Mani, who was a member of the Socialist Party. So that didn't come from the Congress or the States People's Movement, but the Congress and States People's Movement did play a role in creating dharnas and protests and marches there to have some disturbance to make the Maharaja change his decision.
Okay. So yeah, moving on to the next state that you have included here, Bhopal. Bhopal, I think the Nawab of Bhopal was like the ruler was trying to get everybody to form a third front.
Yeah.
So can you talk a bit about the third front? That was the idea of the third front, and why did it not become so popular with the rulers of India?
Yeah, the Nawab of Bhopal was actually a very important character in this entire story, not just in the chapter of Bhopal, but all chapters, because he was the flag bearer of this third front idea. He's a very interesting person. In many accounts today, he's villainized as somebody who was anti-India, and I don't see him like that at all. He was actually, in the initial years of his life, he was a staunch nationalist, and he supported the nationalist movement, and he always, said our duty is first to India and then to our own princely, priorities. And there was a party where the viceroy's wife actually insulted Gandhi, and he actually said, the next time you say something nasty about Gandhi, I'm walking out. So he took a stand. He was very vocal, and he was well educated, well read. I remember reading this account about him, that when there were riots happening in other parts of British India, Bhopal didn't have any problems. And he actually appealed to the Muslim residents of Bhopal, saying, as Muslim residents of a Muslim-ruled state, there is greater responsibility on you to keep the peace, and you have to support and help your Hindu and Sikh and Christian neighbors. So he was a very, liberal, egalitarian person. He celebrated Holi and Eid with as much fervor in his palace. So he was it comes as a surprise that later on he said, let's keep out of India, because in his 20s, 30s, he was just not like that. And if you then as we come to 1947, he sees a lot of Hindu rulers going to, leaning towards the Hindu Mahasabha. So he finds that he will probably be left out in this, group of Hindu rulers, because he's a Nawab and a Muslim ruled state. So he says, then I have to fend for myself. And he also thinks that the best bet the princely states have is as a separate third front, because India, Nehru was very clear that princes and royalty and monarchy have no place in the modern India that he wants to build. It should be a republic, it should be based on democracy and so on. So the Nawab is telling everybody that, we will be wiped out. And he was eventually proved right. And he said, we will be wiped out, our privileges will be taken, and that is the way of life they knew in the 1940s. And they didn't want, nobody wants, everybody will fight for survival. So it was a fight for survival for their way of life, and he tries to convince many people, saying, we don't want to join Pakistan, we don't want to be part of an Islamic state or either, and we don't want to be part of a democratic state. So let's make our place for ourselves, where people of all faiths, like we have been having in our kingdom, have a place. But at the same time, we are not a democracy. We continue to be monarchies. So let's have a third country called Princestan or Rajasthan, not the current state of Rajasthan, but that is the battle that he fought, and he tried and convinced a lot of people. Like he tried with not just people around him, like Gwalior and Indore and places today in Madhya Pradesh, which were earlier independent kingdoms, but he also reached out to several others. He was a chancellor of the Chamber of Princes, so he had, he was a respected person, and he was also very close to the British, because the Viceroy was a very good friend of his. He was one of the only few people who would address him as Dicky, which was his Mountbatten's pet name. So he was a friend of the Viceroy. So he had he was sort of a bridge between the British and the other rulers. And he if you put yourself in his shoes, it was a battle for survival. And he tried his best to have this third front or third nation. But ultimately it was Sardar Patel and Menon who convinced them to against his plan, and it didn't work.
Very interesting, because I would have assumed that some of those rulers would have been would have leaned towards it. What if, have you ever thought about what if that had happened and we had a third front, maybe a third nation? What kind of consequences that could have had in the political or current scenario? That is something that I actually have thought about it earlier also. But very very interesting narration stories.
So actually when I go to schools, when I talk about this book, one of the first things I show is on the presentation is a map of India. It is a map of undivided India, which we can probably show on the screen here as well. Which is a part of it is pink and a part of it is yellow. So the yellow parts are British India and the pink parts are what the princely states were. And it's surprising that we don't really learn about it in schools, because that pink part is actually 45% of undivided India. So it's almost half. And if, like you're saying, think about what would have happened if these parts had not acceded, we would have had a very different map of India. We would have had big gaps in big holes in the map of India. We may even have had parts of Pakistan. Like Junagadh had acceded to Pakistan. If Hyderabad or Bhopal or Rampur, Pakistan even reached out to the Nawab of Rampur. If any of these places had acceded to Pakistan, we would have had parts of Pakistan in the middle of India. So it's actually a scenario that you can't even imagine, given that relations between Pakistan and India are like this. We absolutely could have been disastrous.
What role did infrastructure? So water supply system in for Rajasthan particularly. I think also in Punjab for that matter, right? Played what role it played in decision taken by states like Bikaner or even Jodhpur for that matter. I think the food supply system. So what role that played in their decision to accede, whether to accede to India or to Pakistan?
So all the rulers, the decision was left to them whether to join India, join Pakistan, or remain free, because now the British were leaving and the treaties which they had with them, they were pulling out of it. So the ruler had to decide. And in many cases, especially like you said in Rajasthan, they were firstly going to be on the border. One side they would have India and the other side would be Pakistan. And some of them, like Bikaner for example, the previous ruler of Bikaner, Maharaja Ganga Singh, had spent 20 to 30 years of his life trying to divert water from Punjab to Rajasthan, because Rajasthan is a dry desert, as we all know. And for the people to have water, for state to have water, he had actually constructed kilometers of canal from Firozpur in Punjab, which brought water from the Satluj to Rajasthan. And he had done this by contributing to Britain's war funds to please the viceroy and to please Britain, to get permission, because Punjab, part of Punjab was in British India. So to get them to approve and build the canal, give him the support. So he had done a lot to get water to Rajasthan. And he was not the king in 1947. It was his son, Maharaja Sadhu Singh. But they all feared that if Firozpur, Radcliffe is the person who was drawing the boundary line in Punjab to divide India and Pakistan, and they didn't note in the last minute where Firozpur would go. Firozpur is where the canals, the headworks of the canal were in Firozpur. Starting, the water from the Satluj was coming from there. So if Firozpur was given to Pakistan in the boundary award, the source of their water, the headworks of the canal would go into Pakistan. So that fear was there in the ruler of Bikaner and people in Bikaner and the irrigation department there, and that's their life supply. It was water. I mean, it was the most important resource for a desert kingdom, that too. So he actually makes many appeals. Their Diwan K.M. Panikkar makes many appeals to the viceroy. They go and meet him. They say, you have to make sure Firozpur is given to India. The viceroy says, I am not drawing the boundary line. I can't do anything. I'm not going to intervene. Radcliffe is doing it. And they try their best to get this. And Radcliffe actually is a person who's never been to India, and he's studying these boundary, census figures, which are all outdated. He doesn't even have the latest census figures. And Firozpur has a marginal Muslim majority. And he is dividing every district based on majority population. Of course, the Boundary Commission is taking petitions from everyone who has something to say, saying, there is a Gurdwara here, so please give it to the Indian side. So lots of petitions like this are coming constantly. So how many people is he going to listen to? So of course, they also told the Boundary Commission that our headworks of our irrigation are there. But Pakistan also had so a lot of arsenal was, their ammunition was situated in Firozpur. So that would have, the Pakistani army would need that as well. So they also had a case to say Firozpur should come to us. And like I said, it had a marginal Muslim majority. So actually, the state, till the end, one is not sure where Firozpur is going to go. And one of the threats that they made just as posturing to the viceroy is K.M. Panikkar goes to meet him and he says, we have no choice. If you give Firozpur to Pakistan, Bikaner will have to join Pakistan. It was actually just, in bluff, you you pretend like you're going to do something just to put pressure on the other side. It was more a case of bluff. But the viceroy again said, it's not in my hands. And then some dramatic events do take place. There is a midnight summons. Menon goes to meet, call Radcliffe for dinner. And Radcliffe is called to the viceroy's house, not for dinner, for lunch. And Radcliffe is called alone. He's told not to come with anybody else, just to come alone. Radcliffe goes for this lunch, and the viceroy apparently is very terse with him. And Nehru has told the viceroy, some other people have told the viceroy that you just have to make sure Firozpur comes to India, for Bikaner to stay in India. And ultimately what happened, it's all shrouded in mystery. There is no record. Menon leaves an account of all these events. But he doesn't mention this meeting, he doesn't say what happens. The only person who mentions this meeting is actually Radcliffe's secretary, Beaumont, who leaves an interview many years later and says this meeting happened between Radcliffe and Viceroy. Viceroy may have put pressure on him, but nobody else was there except these two. And these two have not left a note of what happened at the meeting. But ultimately, Firozpur is given to India and Bikaner stays with India. So what happened in the meeting? Did the Viceroy, and the Pakistanis always said the Viceroy put pressure on Radcliffe to change the boundary award. Because not just Firozpur, but Gurdaspur also in Punjab was given to India despite it having a Muslim majority. So there again they had a problem, and they kept thinking that the Viceroy has been partial to India. But yes, so water played a very, very important role, to answer your question, in Bikaner. In Jodhpur also, Jodhpur was having a long period of drought. And the Maharaja of Jodhpur, actually, Maharaja Hanwant Singh, very young person, he's just 24 years old when the events take place. He has just lost his father. And he's a very inexperienced person. He's a very good-hearted man. He also was a nationalist in his early years. He used to go and stick posters supporting the Congress in different parts, although he was supposed to be neutral as a prince. So he also had he was pro-India, but he had a huge period of drought going on in Jodhpur. He had just lost his father. He was not experienced. And the Nawab of Bhopal takes him to meet Jinnah. And Jinnah promises the sky to him. He gives him a blank check and says, you write whatever conditions you want, and I will accept them as long as Jodhpur can join Pakistan. He says, I will make you the king of all of Rajputana. He says, I will give you control over the railway line of Sindh. I will give you control over the whole of Sindh in what will be Pakistan. And the rulers of Jodhpur actually had ruled that area many years ago. And for this 24-year-old boy, it's very, very tempting. And Jinnah was this forbidding figure, so it was very hard. And he gave him control of the railways. He said, I will give you complete control of Karachi port. You can use it to trade all your goods. So it was very, very tempting, and he actually gave him the papers, gave him this blank check and said, sign it now. And he had the pen in his hand. It was actually his advisor, like you mentioned, the earlier, many divans who played a very important role. Here it was his assistant, ADC. He actually said, while he was about, still, with a pen in his hand, he tells him, why don't you just go back, ask your mother, ask the sardars of your kingdom, ask the divan, and come back tomorrow if you want to sign it. Don't sign it now. He just whispers that in his ears. And the Maharaja says, yes, I think that's a good call. And he goes back. So he was on the verge of, giving Jodhpur to Pakistan. So, and then a lot of, again, dramatic events take place. In fact, there is this very, maybe a friend of mine told me that is the most dramatic scene of the book where the Maharaja of Jodhpur is talking to Menon in the Viceroy's study. And he pulls out a pen and points it at Menon. And Menon is wondering why he's pointing a pen at his head. And he flips a button on it and the pen becomes a pistol. So this guy is actually holding a pistol to BP Menon's head. The Maharaja of Jodhpur is holding a pistol. And so this is a very tense situation for this person. Ultimately, Jodhpur joins India, but that is the story of the skill and the pressure that Sardar Patel and Menon went through to get all these kingdoms. But so like Jodhpur, Bikaner, infrastructure, water played a very crucial role. And therefore, when today we sit in judgment of these people saying, they were going to join Pakistan, they're anti-national, all these things are said on social media. You don't understand what they lived through. I mean, if you were not going to get water and the source of your water was going away to somebody else who may not then deny you that water later. And you're the Maharaja of your kingdom. It's not just your life. It's millions of people, right? So it's not an easy decision to take, especially for a young person. So they played the water was a very important factor in these decisions for the Rajputana kingdoms.
So that leads me to so many questions. So one is, so Mountbatten did play a very important role in getting the states. I mean, you talk about the basket of apples and everything. Was it really true? Did you, through your research, have you really come across this? That was he really biased towards India? Because a lot of Indians also blame him to be biased towards Pakistan. So
definitely the Indian side approached him to say, please help us reach out to the Maharajas. Now the Pakistani side did not approach any ruler till they got independence. All their accession papers have been signed after 14th of August 1947. They were not in any hurry at all because they were setting up a new country, they were setting up an entire different administration, they were busy with all that. Delhi was already the capital, Delhi already had all the infrastructure. So the Indian, of course, there was transfer of powers going on even on the Indian side, but the setting up government completely different in Karachi at that time, and then they moved to Islamabad later. But it was a big exercise. So they were busy with that, and more importantly, they didn't have 500 plus kingdoms. They had to deal with only a dozen kingdoms, and all of them were Muslim majority, Muslim ruled states. They didn't have the conflict like in many of these states. The population would be Hindu majority like Hyderabad, and the ruler is Muslim, the Nizam. So there's a conflict between what the people want and what the ruler wants. Or the reverse in Kashmir, where the population was Muslim majority but the ruler was Hindu. So again, those situations were not there in the princely states that ultimately joined Pakistan. So they seemed to be in no hurry at all. So they did not approach the viceroy for help. The Indian side was in a hurry. They knew that there was this potential for fractured country if people don't accede. And they approached the viceroy. It was VP Menon's brilliant idea to say, let's go to the viceroy because he's a royal. He was a great grandson of Queen Victoria. And as a blue-blooded royal, these things mattered a lot to the rulers. They actually took his word, they believed him, they thought he was like a cousin to them, and they felt like he was one of them. So Menon thought, that will work, let's ask him to talk to the rulers for us. So he actually addresses the Chamber of Princes and he gives them all this advice, which the Indian side should have been giving them. So it was pro-India in that sense. One of the things that I think, and other historians also have written, that ticked Mountbatten off against Pakistan is Mountbatten wanted to be the Governor General of both India and Pakistan. He thought it was good for some period to have a common Governor General for ease of transition. He proposed this idea to both Nehru and Jinnah. Nehru would have preferred again to have an Indian Governor General, but he accepted Mountbatten's suggestion, and Mountbatten was the first Governor General of India till C. Rajagopalachari took over a year later. But Jinnah refused it outright. He said it's impossible. We are becoming independent. We don't want a British person as our Governor General. And in any case, how will the Governor General of Pakistan operate from Delhi? That doesn't. We are an independent country now. We want to be different from India. We don't want our Governor General to be sitting in Delhi. And be a common Governor General of India and Pakistan. He said, I will be the Governor General of Pakistan, and Liaquat Ali Khan became Prime Minister. So that actually, Mountbatten was apparently very, very insulted. If you read what his biographers say, he had assumed and he had informed London that he's going to be, and he was a person who loved pomp and pageantry and position, and he was very conscious of all these things. And he had already informed everybody like it was a pre-decided thing. And then suddenly to be told by Jinnah that we don't want you as a Governor General, apparently it made him very, he ticked him off. And that could have been the moment that tilted the scales. And also, like I said, the Indian side approached him and asked him for help. The Pakistani side did not do that. So he did definitely help. That's why he's one of the 4 people on the back cover. A lot of his, talks with the rulers, his connection with the rulers, some of them, like I told you, Nawab Gopal considered him as a personal friend. It did have a very big role to play in convincing the rulers.
Also, coming to Junagadh, since you were talking about it a bit earlier, Junagadh decided, and it actually acceded to Pakistan. Why would the Nawab choose to do that, knowing that majority of his population was Hindu,
Yeah.
and the entire partition was based on this Hindu Muslim, that's the two nation theory.
Yeah.
So that's one question, and a sub question could be, why was Jinnah so interested in getting so many princely states on his side?
Yeah.
So
Jinnah actually was not expecting to lose half of Bengal and half of Punjab in the Pakistan of his dreams. He thought he will get the whole of Punjab and the whole of Bengal. And then that didn't go according to his plan. Both Bengal and Punjab, the Legislative Assembly voted, and half of Bengal came to India and half went to Pakistan. And similarly in Punjab, part of it came to India, part of it came to Pakistan. So he was not, that was a jolt for him. He called it a moth-eaten Pakistan, and he told the Viceroy, even if you give me a moth-eaten Pakistan, I'll take it, but he was very angry about this. So it was not something he expected. Then when this princely state situation unfolded itself, he thought he can compensate for the loss of Punjab, part of Punjab and part of Bengal, by getting some of these princely states to join India. And actually this happened even in reverse, because when Viceroy Mountbatten was meeting the Indian leaders when he had just arrived in March 1947, Menon, who was the reforms commissioner of the Viceroy, he actually gives him this idea that partition is probably the only, if partition is the solution we are looking at. This was before the decision was taken. He said one of the things you can tell the Indian side to convince them to accept partition is that the territory which they will lose as Pakistan, a large part of the Indian subcontinent will be lost to Pakistan. You can gain almost the same amount of territory if the princely states become part of India. So it was a give and take sort of, and the land-wise, he gave these figures to him. So even for Jinnah, the loss of part of Bengal and part of Punjab, he thought by appealing to these princely states, he can make up for that, compensate for that by getting them to join Pakistan. So he was reaching out to princely state, so that was the reason he was doing that. And coming to Junagadh, so firstly Junagadh, again, the situation like I mentioned earlier, it has a Hindu majority with a Muslim ruler, right? And till the end, the constitutional advisor of Junagadh actually advised the Maharaja, the Nawab, to join India. The Nawab had taken a meeting of various groups, and they all, thought that Junagadh should join India. Until the end, they kept telling the Indian side that yes, we are going to join India. So the Diwan of Junagadh at that time was Shahnawaz Bhutto, who is the grandfather of Benazir Bhutto, and he was a Muslim League person, very close to the Muslim League, very close to Jinnah. And he then convinced, he was a new Diwan, he was newly appointed just a few weeks before the events happened, and he convinced the Nawab to join Pakistan. And he said, and one of the reasons given was that although Junagadh didn't have a land link with Pakistan, through the sea it was connected, because the port, Verawal port, was not very far from Karachi. So they had a sea port, and if required, supplies could come from Pakistan through sea. And Jinnah assured Shahnawaz Bhutto that if India gives you trouble, we will send in our army, we will give you all the support we can. So the Nawab, accepted those assurances. And he was also a little eccentric in that sense. He once had a state holiday declared for the marriage of his dogs. He was a big dog lover, he had hundreds of dogs. And when he actually left Junagadh for Pakistan, he was careful to take all his dogs with him, and he left one of his children behind. So he was so dog crazy. So he was also a little bit of eccentric person, but having said that, we should also, the Gir National Forest, which is today in Gujarat, the Asiatic lion, which was spread all over Asia at some point in time, is today restricted to a small patch of land in Gujarat, which is the Gir National Park. And and one of the reasons is that the Nawab was an animal lover. So he protected the lions, he protected the forests there. So that eccentricity also has, the benefits we see in lion animal protection. But he did have. He did fall for the advice given by Shahnawaz Bhutto on the assurances of Jinnah that Pakistan would come to their aid and at least we have a sea link. So that's how he signed, and they did not inform the Indian side. It was actually a big jolt for Sardar Patel because he read it in the newspaper that Junagadh is acceded to Pakistan. 2 days after independence, he got that news. So it was a jolt, and then a lot of things happened, including a referendum was held in Junagadh where the people voted, and then the decision was overturned. But Pakistan showed Junagadh on their map for a very, very long time because they consider it a part of Pakistan because the ruler joined. And then later on, after he went to Pakistan, he realized his decision was not the best decision, and he appealed to the Indian government saying, "Can I please come back to India? I want to come back to Junagadh, and I made a mistake," and so on. But
chapter.
Yeah.
So I think the Raja Patiala, the Maharaja Patiala, was also offered by Jinnah.
Yes.
That he would make him the ruler of the entire Punjab if he joins Pakistan. And Pakistan did have a large number of Sikh population. Many of their important religious sites are located now in Pakistan, right? So can you talk about the entire? I mean, I think this was the most difficult chapter to read also.
Yeah.
So what was your what was how did you deal with it emotionally, or when you were writing this chapter, and you talk about the partition and the role played by the rulers of Punjab, like all the Nabab, Kapurthala, in during the partition of Punjab.
Yeah.
So could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so Patiala actually was honestly a very difficult chapter to write also, because I had to read through so much partition history which is very painful to read, including first-hand accounts. In fact, there is one scene in the book where a father kills his own daughter because he wants to save her from the mobs that might, kidnap her, rape her, and so on. And he kills 26 people, women in his family. This man kills 26 women of his extended family. And the accounts are given actually by survivors. This person who, Veer Bahadur Singh, who's, you will find a video of him on YouTube where he's a 92-year-old, I think, when he narrates the story. And he's survived this as a little boy. So it was very, very difficult to read. It would actually, sometimes I had nightmares about all those partition stories that I read. But I had to be done for Patiala. And Patiala, Punjab was a very was a very difficult situation for even the people who were there, because part of Punjab was in British India, and a large parts of Punjab were different kingdoms like Kapurthala and Nabha and Jind and Patiala and so on. And it had certain pockets with a Muslim majority, certain pockets with a Hindu majority, large parts, and Sikhs were distributed all over. So it was a demographically, politically, very, very complex situation. And of course, partition, we knew that partition was going to cut across Punjab. Where the boundary line was going to be, finally, nobody would know. But that created refugee situations, it created a lot of violence. And in the middle of all this, Jinnah actually reaches out to the Maharaja of Patiala. Maharaja of Patiala is also seen as, Patiala is one of the more important kingdoms there. So he reaches out and says, we can end all this violence and everything can come to a stop if you states of Punjab join Pakistan, because many of them were worried that their gurudwaras would go into Pakistan. Many of them, their land, their property, their homes, farms, a lot of it would go into Pakistan. So he said, all these worries will come to an end if all the kingdoms, or whole of Punjab actually comes and joins Pakistan. So he did reach out to the Maharaja of Patiala. They had a couple of meetings. But there has always been this history, between, from Mughal times, when the Mughals had persecuted the Sikh gurus and so on, and there was a lot of bad blood between them, the two communities, and also violence had been taking place, riots had been taking place, so there was a lot of distrust also between the Sikh population and the Muslim population there. So it was not easy to have these negotiations, and the Maharaja of Patiala himself was very uncomfortable, but he was convinced to go and at least listen to what Jinnah has to say. So he did have meetings. Jinnah offered him and said that, I will make you the, like you said, Raja of the whole of Punjab and so on, the ruler of Punjab. But ultimately he did not believe what Jinnah said, because he said, you are carving out a country for Muslims based on religion, and this religion, there has been a history of persecution of Sikhs from there, and riots are going on, and how then can I convince my people and say I'm going to join this Islamic country? So it was not obviously very easy for a decision to take, because he also wanted to stop the violence. He wanted to stop these worries that our gurdwaras are going, our land is going away to Pakistan, how will we visit these places, and farms and families were being ripped apart. So he thought, in one way, if that stops all the violence, maybe it's something I should consider. But then there were other repercussions of how can Sikh states and people with majority of Sikhs and Hindus, how can I take them into an Islamic? But there was a period of indecision or period of consideration. I don't think he was ever seriously considering it, but there were talks and negotiations going on.
I think the Akalis also played a very important role to get him,
Yes.
to convince him not to get in there, right?
Yeah. So there was Yani Kartar Singh and all that. They didn't even want the Maharaja to meet Jinnah. They said, after direct action day, the kind of violence Lahore and other places had seen, and the streets, they were spilling out on the streets, there was bloodshed. And he said, and we all seen, in movies, this particular scene, which was described by Khushwant Singh also, where a train full of corpses are sent. So he says, when all this is going on, how can you even go and talk to Jinnah? So he said, I cannot even allow you to talk. But like I said, the ruler had a responsibility. In fact, the Maharani of Patiala had opened out her palace kitchens and the palace grounds for refugees coming in. So there was this huge influx that they were seeing daily of suffering. So the Maharaja was also thinking, if I can end all the suffering by just taking this decision, maybe it's worth considering. So yeah, but ultimately he went with what the Akali, the leaders also suggested, that you can't join Pakistan.
Good sense prevailed, I would say. Alright, so let's come to Kashmir. Right, so why do you think was the Maharaja of Kashmir so indecisive? He could have easily taken the decision to join India or Pakistan. But what was his reason to remain wanting to be independent rather than joining either?
Kashmir chapter is the most dramatic in some sense, because the repercussions continue to affect our politics and lives today. So the Maharaja of Kashmir was in a very odd situation. So one is, of course, he was in between he was in one of the border states. He could have joined India or Pakistan. The second was, he had a Muslim majority in the valley. In the Jammu region there were a lot of Hindus, and in the Ladakh region there were a lot of Buddhists. So he thought, if I join Pakistan, the Hindus and the Buddhists, that the decision would not be something they would like. If I join India, the Muslims may not like this decision. So he thought the best decision for me to make is to stay independent. That I will stay friendly with India and Pakistan, but I will stay independent. And he also, the Kashmir is a beautiful place. It has water, it has lots of rivers, it has meadows, it has fruits, it has abundant resources. And he actually told Mountbatten, when Mountbatten comes to meet him, that I want to turn Kashmir into the Switzerland of the East. And he had a good case for that. The Kashmir is in so many ways as beautiful, if not more beautiful than Switzerland. And he wanted to turn it into a haven of tourism. And he thought he had all the resources for that, and he could do that. He said, I will join neither India or Pakistan. I don't want to antagonize any of them. And also, he did not really have, did not get along with Jinnah, nor did he get along with Nehru. So he thought the best thing for me is to have friendly relations with both and stay independent. It's best for my people and for me. There was no question of him personally joining Pakistan, because he was a Dogra Rajput. So joining an Islamic state didn't make sense for him. And he was a royal, he was a monarch. He did not want to join a democratic republic, what will ultimately become a democratic. So politically, personally, looking at the demographics of his land and looking at the potential of the land to be like a Switzerland, all that went into his decision of, I'll stay independent, I don't want to join either. But then things changed when the Pakistani side attacked. There was an attack on Kashmir. It's called an attack by raiders, but it was completely supported, sponsored, planned, everything by the Pakistani army. He, of course, with several years of association, the British had disengaged all the militaries, of the princely kingdoms, because that is how they controlled them. So the Maharaja's resources were very, few. So he could not defend Kashmir from the onslaught that came from the Pakistani side, and he had to appeal to the Indian side for help, because these people attacking from Pakistan, they had Muzaffarabad and Baramulla were in ruins, and they had not just they said it is to help the Muslims of the valley, but actually even Hindu, Muslim, Sikh women were all raped, tortured, taken back. Shops were raided, so the whole place was a mess. And the Maharaja could not repel this attack, and he asked the Indian army to help. And then rightly Viceroy Mountbatten, who was then the Governor General at that time, because this was October 1947, so he was no longer Viceroy. So he said, how if India sends this army into Kashmir, Kashmir is not yet a part of India at that time, it wasn't. So it would be sending an army into a third country. So and to fight Pakistan. So it was a third or a neutral country. So he said, we can't take this decision. And then the Maharaja was told that if you want the Indian army to help, you would first have to accede to India. You would have to sign the accession papers. And he said, yes, I'm ready to sign the accession papers, but I'm in desperate need of help. Please send somebody. And there is another scene where, when Menon tells him that, yes, you sign the accession papers, I'll take it back to Delhi. There'll be an immediate emergency defense meeting and the Indian army will come. At that time, Maharaja Hari Singh apparently gives his ADC, his assistant, his revolver and says, if the Indian army does not land in Srinagar tomorrow morning, shoot me dead in my sleep. So that is the kind of tense moment. It was really good. Even Sardar Patel makes this quote. He says, if the Maharaja had come to us one day later, things could have been lost forever. So that's why he was indecisive, because demographically, personally, politically, the situation was like that in Kashmir. But then his hands were forced by what happened when Pakistan attacked Kashmir, and then he acceded to India because of that. So Pakistan therefore continues to claim that he acceded under pressure because it was not his voluntary decision. You put pressure on him saying, if you don't accede, we will not send the Indian army. To which our answer is, but who put the pressure on him? You guys attacked him. So yeah, then after that, a lot of water is flown under the bridge, and the dispute continues, unfortunately. Yeah.
Did it ever cross his mind to get help from any other nations that are located around? Have you come across that in your research? USSR is there, China is close by.
No, I did not come across any other, that he reached out to anybody else for help. His own forces, some of the colonels, the local forces that he had, they definitely sent them out, and some of them were the earliest recipients of the Paramveer Chakra in India and the Bravery Awards. They lost their life in those battles, but he did not I did not come across him appealing to other forces. It was the next best choice after his own forces could not hold fort, was to ask India for help.
Coming towards the end of the book, so I wanted to ask you about the relations between Nehru and Sardar Patel throughout the course. This was a very tense time, right?
Right.
So I think you have also talked about that a bit towards the end.
Yes.
So could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so this actually has become a very contentious issue these days also, because a lot of people online and people saying that Sardar Patel should have been our first prime minister and things would have been different and so on. So so Nehru and Patel were both Gandhi's right and left hand in the Congress in that sense, and both were the most trusted lieutenants of Gandhi. And Sardar Patel was of course senior to Nehru. He was, I think, roughly 15 years older than Nehru. He was also more experienced. He was a ground level person. He was, he'd risen from the ground. Nehru, of course, was born to Motilal Nehru, comes from a more elite background. So their backgrounds were very different. They were very different people temperamentally. Nehru spoke a lot. He wrote a lot. Sardar Patel didn't speak much. He didn't leave any autobiography of his life. So temperamentally, personally, they were very different people, but both had the same objective. They both wanted what was best for India. And they also were different in terms of approach to the princely states. Nehru had made very bombastic statements that there's no place for monarchs and rulers in the new India. We're going to be a republic, and all these princely ideas are obsolete, and princes are obsolete in India. Sardar Patel would, I think, also have felt the same way, because he had no respect for these princely privileges and titles and honors, but he wouldn't say it to their face. He was a very diplomatic person. And therefore, when he was appointed the states minister, Gandhi actually said that you are the only person who can solve this mess, because it's such a complex problem and you have the capability to do it. And Mountbatten also apparently said that I am glad Sardar Patel is the states minister and not Nehru, because Nehru has his head in the clouds and Sardar Patel has his feet on the ground. So Nehru was a more idealistic person, wore his heart on his sleeve, would express himself very firmly, assertively. Sardar Patel was more diplomatic. He would know how to deal with different people differently. But I think both of them had the same objective. They both wanted what was best for India. They both were staunch, anti-colonialists. They wanted the British out. They were very clear that if, after we have partition, they wanted the British out. They were very clear that if, after we have partition, the rest of India, we wanted to be a republic. We wanted to not be have anything to do with monarchy and these old values. So both of them had the same goal in that sense, but their process, their personalities were different. But of course, towards the end, there is this famous episode where the Congress election happens, and most of the provinces actually vote for Patel to be their leader, and then he takes it back because Gandhi wants Nehru to be the leader. That does take place, but to Sardar Patel's credit, he does not let it embitter relations with Nehru at all. And in fact, Gandhi, I think, says that or writes that somewhere, that I don't think Nehru would have been okay being the second in command, but Sardar he is not about position at all. For him, it is about service to India, and he wants what is best, and he would be more amenable to be second in command, and things would work more amicably that way. So that was one of the reasons he, I think, did what he did. But so relations there were many tense moments. There were tense moments when Nehru actually makes these statements about kings and princes, and then Sardar has to make up for it by toning it down and so on. There is also this big showdown they have in the Hyderabad chapter, the last chapter of the book, where it actually comes down to almost a breakage where Sardar resigns and he says, I can't work with Nehru anymore, and I don't want to do this. And then he has palpitations. He has a lot of health problems also during this time. Sardar is 72. And he has to actually be sitting in an oxygen tent because he's not able to breathe after the showdown with Nehru. So there is a lot of drama that takes place. So there were, for a large part, they worked well together. There were, I think, in any relationship, whether it is a political relationship or whether in a family or in a marriage, there are disagreements. There will be disagreements between two people who have their own brain. They will always have some disagreements, right? So I don't think disagreements is a problem at all. That Nehru and Sardar disagreed, I think, is a very natural process of two people who think for themselves and who were independent and forceful and assertive. But in some cases it became acrimonious. For the large part it was smooth, but there were cases where it became acrimonious. And one of the reasons, I think, there was Sardar was also, his maturity played a role in, although he was asked to step back, he did not let it affect his service and what he wanted to do. He was Home Minister, he was Deputy Prime Minister, and he was okay serving under a person younger than him, less experienced than him, and who had not got the votes that he had got from the provinces. So that did have a role to play in the fact that they worked together, but there were very tense moments also where they disagreed and they did not get along, and there was a showdown as well, as in Hyderabad.
Would you like to talk about your writing style? Like the way you have written the chapters, you have written about the story of the princely estate, and then you have given a postscript
Right.
everywhere, right? In every chapter.
Yeah.
So you have a postscript, and then you have this section called "Did it really happen this way?"
Yes.
So why did you choose to write in this manner?
Okay. Right. So the writing style, as I mentioned earlier, is non-fiction, but with certain elements of fiction. So this is called creative non-fiction, it's an interesting thing to distinguish between historical fiction and creative non-fiction. So in historical fiction, you take a situation in history and then you imagine certain things, that if this had happened, let's say these same stories, there is all this acrimonious riots are going on, there is Hindu-Muslim problems, and then if partition had not happened, then I start imagining the story and then write the story. That is historical fiction, because that is it's a part of your imagination, because partition actually did happen. So that is historical fiction. But when you take all the elements that happened during partition and freedom and so on, but you don't write it as an academic book that on this date this happened, this meeting happened, the Viceroy said this and Nehru said this, and then put footnotes for everything, which is a typical non-fiction presentation. But you take that meeting and you maybe like somebody in the room, who's an invisible person sitting in the room watching this meeting, making it visual, and as Viceroy is saying, whatever he's saying, he's dabbling his eyebrow, he's nervously cracking his knuckles. So it is a visual thing. The Viceroy is saying exactly what you find in his speech or in his letters. So you're not imagining that, but you're seeing it visually. Because actually that would have happened visually, when they're talking. They were people who talk like us or walk like us, and they're sitting around a room, they're looking at each other, their gestures. So you make it visual. So those parts are to some extent imagined or create. That's why it's called creative non-fiction, where you add elements of fiction, you add the emotion, you add the human angle to these dry narratives of just facts and figures and dates and footnotes sort of thing. So that is the writing style I really like. I think that makes history more interesting. Some of them who the best compliment I feel I get is from people who say that I never liked history, but I find this book interesting, because I think that makes me feel like I did what I set out to do. And I think the reason is because you see it as a human story. You put yourself in the shoes of these Maharajas and Sardar Patel and Nehru. You don't see them as these distant, foggy old figures that you can't relate to. Because the emotion is what, we are common, that's what binds everyone. The same fears, that if you're not going to get water, for example, that's what makes it a real gripping story, right? If you just talk about some letters, the Maharaja of Bikaner wrote this letter to Nehru and then Nehru wrote this letter, it just takes away all those emotions from the story. So I wanted to make it gripping, and the one way to do it is by adding the emotions, which would have been there. It's not that I'm imagining or creating something which didn't exist. So that's why it's not historical fiction, it is creative non-fiction. That is the style of writing, which which is also one of my favorite genres in reading. I like reading this genre, so I wanted to write in that. And the other parts that you mentioned of did it really happen this way, very often I read books, historical fiction also or non-fiction, and I want to know what the source is, but the author has not given the source. And the author is, in historical fiction especially, because part of it is history, part of it is imagination, I want to know which part the author has imagined and which part is actually factual. But I don't get that information at the end. So I've always felt this gap when I read. So I wanted to fulfill that, fill that gap when I write, that this part is actually this happened this way, and I've taken it from these sources. And in certain cases, for example, in in Bhopal's case, there is a discussion that he's having about whether he should have a third front or join India or join Pakistan. But he's having this discussion during a shikar scene, when he's out to shoot tigers. Now, those discussions actually happened. The shikar, all these princely rulers actually went out on shikar. But did that discussion happen during the shikar? I don't know. But I want to give you a sense of the life of a ruler, and so I'm not imagining something that didn't happen. I'm just using my creativity to merge two things and make it happen at the same time. So that is the writing style which is used. And did it happen really this way? Is just to tell you that, look, this happened, the shikars did happen, but I have used my imagination or creative license to put it together in the same scene, so that you as a reader, I do justice to you, your curiosity, that it didn't happen exactly this way or it happened this way, but not in this sequence. Whatever liberties I've taken, I think I owe it to the reader to be honest and tell them. So that's a gap I feel in books that I read. So I wanted to make sure that I don't leave that gap.
Yeah, agree to you. It's like your end note, kind of.
Yeah.
Like an end note.
Yeah.
I think if more history books are written in this manner, more people would read them.
Great, that's the hope.
So, forced to another, going down the rabbit hole. So I mean, it's an apt name for the series.
Yeah, even I like the name very much, like the Alice in Wonderland connection of going down a rabbit hole and discovering so many fascinating things about a very different world, and then coming out rich with all this experience. So yeah, the name is very nice, and I look forward to listening to other episodes on the channel as well.